Louise Bean, Blaze Project, Burning Questions. Thank you for making it all the way to the 3rd episode with me. Is there an animal that strikes fear into your heart at the mere mention of its name? Maybe it's a species that you had a scary interaction with at some point in your life. Maybe you saw it in a movie or a TV show and you just can't quite get it out of your head. Maybe you saw what it was able to do to a landscape. For me, it's the tiny little pine beetle. I know, it's silly to fear a 1/4-inch sized insect, but growing up, I felt like it was my arch nemesis, destroying the places I loved in a way that I had no control over. See, the mountain pine beetles make a living in the bark of pine trees. They overwhelm a tree's defenses and burrow underneath the bark to lay their eggs and raise their larvae, disrupting the tree's ability to move nutrients up and down its trunk. Worse yet, adults introduce a potent fungus that creates that notorious blue stain on the wood. In reality, these beetles are far from the evil supervillains I had built them up to be in my head, as I watched as beloved pine needles turned from green to red in a way that I knew that only deciduous trees in the fall should. Coupled with the fear of pine beetles was this chilling whisper between older folks. It's a disaster waiting to happen. It's a tinderbox. And it wasn't just the dry beetle kill. These same areas suffered from the same overcrowding and buildup of excess fuels that we discussed in the last episode. When these areas catch fire, they blow up. But a blow-up might be the only thing to reset the clock on these blighted forests and give them a chance to rebuild, better and healthier than before. My guest today is a wilderness ranger with the U.S. Forest Service and a line-qualified wildland firefighter. Not only did she work the East Troublesome fire that burned through Grand Lake and into Rocky Mountain National Park, but she also came back on a trail crew to help with the rebuilding and recovery process in this area that she calls home.
My name is Katie Oliver. I'm a wilderness ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, and I am a red card holder, which means I am qualified to assist on wildland firefighting assignments.
What's your firefighter origin story?
So for me, I never really thought that I would ever see myself on wildland firefighting missions. When I became a backcountry ranger with Canyonlands National Park several years ago, I didn't even know what being a red card holder even meant. I had no idea that you could just take 2 weeks from your normal daily duties to go join, a hand crew or an engine crew and go help on these assignments.
And so what's kept you passionate about wildland fire since it wasn't necessarily something that you saw yourself doing?
Showing up on the assignments is such a change of pace from what I do day to day that it kind of shakes me up and puts me back on alert. And because you do have to be alert when you're called to be an initial attack on a fire, because you kind of just have to be ready for some really intense work to happen just as soon as somebody calls you. So what I like about it and what I find fun about it is just always having to be ready and not knowing what to expect and being thrown into any number of situations and just adapting. And I really enjoy working hard to the point where I'm so exhausted I just want to collapse. And so part of me is just a glutton for punishment. So I do enjoy the hard work of it.
So what surprised you about wildfire when you first started?
I think fire behavior, because it's so complex. You see fires that you can just kind of sit around and just keep an eye on, and they won't really do anything. And then you have fires like the East Troublesome, where they just explode and throw an entire county into chaos. And so just seeing firsthand that range of okay, this is a pretty mellow fire. We don't really need to do a whole lot with it, to okay, we need everyone out now. And then even sometimes firefighters have to back down because it's just too much. And the knowledge that's out there with the crew bosses and going up the incident command system ladder, there's just so much skill and knowledge out there that, it would be impossible to just not work as a full team.
Yeah. Have approaches then to wildland firefighting changed since you began in the field?
Since I have been, I think 4 or 5 years I've been involved in wildland firefighting, so not a ton, but in that time we have seen more record-setting fires. So we've seen some of the fastest growing fires and some of the largest fires, and I'm more talking specifically in Colorado, but of course, you know, they are happening in other states. And so I think as we continue to set more and more records, and then also we're kind of pushing that boundary, and more people are building homes, like they call it the wildland urban interface. You know, that is a concern and something that is talked about more. The more people, you know, want to live out in the country and they build their cabin in the woods, you know, that definitely affects how we handle wildland fires.
Yeah, we've been talking about in the project, on the whole, the Park Service and other government agencies have been using, you know, more of a let it burn policy since the 10 a.m. policy was ended. You know, exception to that, of course, is when you need to protect the public's houses and their businesses and private things like that. But that affects then our ability to let things burn and restore themselves too. So this week's theme is rebuilding, and your experience with that comes with the East Troublesome fire. So I was wondering if you could describe where it was and how it started.
So when I was fresh out of college, my job was to drive tour buses in Rocky Mountain National Park and give programs, because I was working with the nonprofit partner doing education. And part of my program, which I built with the help of my mentor there, was about fire ecology. And we talked about the health of the forest, specifically in Rocky Mountain National Park, and then going over the Continental Divide into like the Grand Lake area. And what we noticed is that in the past, without allowing things to burn and without doing prescribed burning, we had a lot of lodgepole pines come up, and they were just competing too hard with each other. So we started to get really, really tight stands of lodgepoles, and they weren't out competing each other. So part of this program that I did was actually talking about how the forest is really unhealthy right now. And I said, someday this is all going to burn, and it's going to burn so hot and so intense, like it is going to like turn this town upside down. I didn't know that that would be in my lifetime that I saw it, let alone like I didn't know I would be back in the county for that fire as a wildland firefighter. So then fast forwarding to 2020, and I'm on an engine crew, and we were on another fire in southern Colorado, and then we were hearing news about this huge fire that was just spreading super rapidly up in Grand Lake, Colorado. And I was like, oh no, that's where I live. And I had a lot of friends who were on the fire. They like couldn't even pick up a phone call or shoot a quick message because they were just so busy trying to evacuate the town and just hold off the fire and like try to at least protect structures as well as they could. So then, you know, a day and a half later, the crew I was on was able to show up, and we were on the structure protection crew. So we were put into a neighborhood where the fire had swept through, and right now there were just a bunch of spot fires, and so we were tasked with going around with our engine and putting out fires that threatened people's homes that were still standing. So just kind of being there and just witnessing how much the fire impacted this whole area was pretty mind-blowing. And then after that fire the next year, I joined the Grand Lake Trail crew for Rocky Mountain National Park, and the fire had swept through most of our district, and most of our work that summer was going and doing some fire recovery work. So it was a lot more cutting trees that had fallen into the trail. I think we counted like 5,000 trees over the first couple months that we had to cut. So it was a lot of work just getting the trails to be visible. And then the whole water ecology changes after a fire sweeps through an area. Before we could open the trails to the public, we had to make sure that water wasn't going to just completely wash away the trail and we would just be fighting an uphill battle. And then there were certain trails that we just had to close because they had so many structures on there where the only thing left was like a bunch of nails sticking out of the ground. So we like had to make sure that all of the hazards from these burnt bridges and turnpikes and everything were removed so that we could build more effective structures or even like reroute trails if we needed to. And that work wasn't easy. Working in a fire is one thing, but then working in the burn is a different thing. It was just so hot and dusty, and you just felt so dry and parched, and everything you touched would get ash on it. So being part of the rebuilding process was really fun, but it was very mentally taxing, because it's like, oh, there's no shade, and everything is really dusty, and it's really hot, and this isn't normally what the Rocky Mountains feel like.
Yeah.
So,
and I really want to hone in too then on, so you had experiences in this area because you lived there and because you were working there, and you talked about the state of the lodgepole pines, especially at this time. Can you describe for me what a forest that is on the overgrown side might look like, especially when it's lodgepoles?
yeah, so with lodgepoles especially, there are some regions where they are able to compete with each other, and some of them will grow really big. But what happened here is, without any fires coming through and wiping out the weak ones and allowing some to grow, and additionally, I didn't even mention this, we had a pine beetle epidemic, which I'm sure you've probably heard of at this point, but that did contribute a lot to the poor health of the forest. What it looks like is just trees that are so tight together to where at their tightest, like, you wouldn't even be able to walk through them. And that tightness, like, of those trees are part of what allowed the pine beetle to thrive, because it was easy for them to get from tree to tree to tree to tree. It all just kind of created a perfect storm between the lack of fires, the pine beetle, having less cold winters to kill off the pine beetles. Like, it is a very complex thing.
Absolutely. Well, and my understanding of it too is when you get a really tight forest like that too, all of the individual trees prioritize growing tall before they prioritize growing outward and maturing in that way. So you get a lot, they are less likely to drop their lower branches, which then means the fire can climb up and, start a catastrophic crown fire. So then contrasting that visual experience of what we're seeing in the forest, prior to an event like the Troublesome Fire, just get even more into detail with me and describe, being in the backcountry. You said already that there's ash everywhere. Everything that you touch, gets ash on you.
Yeah, when we were there, there were a lot of plants starting to come back, and I was really surprised at that. One of my favorite flowers that grows in the state is called fireweed, and it is one of the first plants typically to move into a burn scar. And it's this tall plant that grows these tall, beautiful purple flowers, and it can turn a burnt landscape into this beautiful purple wonderland. So it was really nice seeing those, and I was surprised at how much shrubbery came up over the course of the summer. And I think what I was most surprised at was the amount of wildlife that stayed at lower elevations. So normally elk during the summer will go up above tree line, they'll hang out up there. But what we noticed was that there were a lot of meadows down low that had grown even lusher and greener after the burn came through. So it was this amazing, beautiful meadow, and you're seeing elk down there in July, which is not something that they usually do. Same with the moose. We saw a lot of moose come through and stay down where they normally wouldn't. And then even just having the forest be thinned out and just having visibility between all these burnt trees, we did see a lot more wildlife moving around, which was pretty fun.
Describe a moment of wonder that you had either during or after this incident that stuck with you.
Something I think about a lot is it is really sad to see such a big burn scar, but I think a lot about future generations and what the forest is going to look like there when it comes back. So I know it's kind of a bummer for me that we're surrounded by this burn scar and unhealthy forests, but at least in that area, in 100 years, it's going to look completely different. And even though I won't be there to see that, I'm really excited for the people who do get to see the forest go back to its original state. That's my hope anyway. We'll find out.
So just to wrap up, what do you wish that more people knew about wildfire? I
think that we are starting to accept that fires are healthy and they are important. And I think something that I wish more people knew was that there is a reason for everything. So if firefighters are letting a fire burn, there's a reason for that. If they are fighting something aggressively, there's a reason for that. And so I think public perception of wildland fires is always changing. And what I would want people to know right now is there's always a reason for everything. Like if you're being evacuated from your house, there's a reason. And if you just, kind of listen to what firefighters are telling you, it's okay to trust them because there is so much knowledge there, and they are the experts, and they are the ones who are out there on the front lines seeing it. So I think that's what I would want people to know.
Yeah, especially, in Colorado, and I've also talked to some folks from California, like when these events become part of our day-to-day lives, unfortunately, like during the summers, I feel like, there's more of an action plan that a lot of people have, but in different states where maybe they're just starting to experience more catastrophic burns and there's maybe not like a preparedness plan in place, there can be like a lot of distrust, and I feel like that just comes from the fear and the not knowing about how fire interacts with our like larger systems and our ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people really don't want fires to interrupt their life, but they're going to. It's going to happen.
It was so wonderful to talk to Katie about her experiences rebuilding after a fire in similar ways that ecosystems rebuild themselves. If you're still curious about ecological succession, rebuilding, or even pine beetles, make sure to check out the show notes and check out Blaze, Ecology of Fire, by following @Blaze Fire Ecology on Instagram. And before you go, I have some exciting news. Blaze has a physical home at South Loop Elementary School now, and I am so excited to install the exhibit, meet the kids that go to school there, and also to keep you guys updated on the process. See you next time, and thanks for joining us today.